What if everything you thought you knew about World War II was only half the story? Beneath the battlefield heroics and official history lies a darker truth, stories so disturbing, they were buried by governments and erased from the record. From forbidden experiments to secret alliances with the enemy, these are the stories they never wanted you to hear. Stay with me, because once you know what really happened, there's no going back. In the bone-chilling winter of 1943, the Arctic Ocean was a graveyard of lost ships and forgotten missions. Among them, Convoy QX-77 was supposed to be just another classified supply route. Composed of 16 freighters escorted by 5 British destroyers and 1 American cruiser, the convoy's goal was simple: deliver experimental weaponry and radar equipment to Soviet allies through the treacherous Northern Passage. The convoy never arrived. For decades, its disappearance was labeled a casualty of German U-boat activity, nothing more than an unfortunate footnote in wartime chaos. But recently declassified British Admiralty documents and Soviet naval logs suggest a darker, more complex reality, one in which the Allies may have been responsible for sinking their own fleet. It began with strange readings off the coast of Svalbard. The British cruiser HMS Nottingham picked up ghost radar signals, multiple contacts moving erratically, vanishing and reappearing in unnatural ways. Captain Alastair Rowe of the Nottingham ordered a sonar sweep, but the only thing detected was silence. Then came the static interference. All communication with the rear half of the convoy was lost for 6 hours. When it returned, 4 ships were missing. Aboard the Soviet ship Dmitry Gurov, Second Officer Nikolai Volkov recorded in his log, "The sea hissed like it was alive. Men stood on deck in silence. We saw the lights of the ships vanish, one by one, as though pulled below." That same night, the Nottingham received coded orders from the Admiralty: engage unidentified marine threat. No identification required. Soon after, the sea lit up with depth charges and torpedoes. But no German subs were ever confirmed in the region. In fact, decrypted Enigma communications from the same date make no mention of U-boat operations in the Arctic Circle at all. 3 days later, only 6 freighters and 1 escort ship limped into Murmansk. The rest were gone, no survivors, no wreckage. Soviet divers dispatched weeks later were warned by British intelligence not to release any findings. But one diver's personal journal, later recovered from archives in Novosibirsk, described discovering hull fragments not from a German torpedo blast, but from direct gunfire, Allied calibers. Even more disturbingly, some damage appeared to have come from above, as if the ships had been struck by airborne munitions, though no enemy planes were reported within 500 miles of the incident. Rumors began to swirl among surviving crew. Some spoke of the Silver Object, a disc-shaped craft that hovered low above the waves hours before the attack. Others claimed the entire incident was a cover for testing a new radar-guided weapon, developed jointly by the British and Americans, which misidentified friendly vessels as targets. Supporting this theory is the involvement of Section 5, a shadow branch of the British Secret Intelligence Service known for experimental warfare programs. A partially unredacted memo from Section 5 mentions a field calibration event, Maritime, December 12, 1943, coinciding exactly with the date of the QX-77 incident. Perhaps the most damning evidence comes from a private letter written by U.S. Navy technician Arthur Kane, who was stationed in Iceland at the time. Addressed to his sister but intercepted and stored in government archives, the letter reads, "They're saying the tests worked too well. Fried half the convoy like firewood. Nobody's talking, not even the Brits. We're ordered to forget it ever happened." Kane died in a car accident 2 weeks later. His sister never received the letter. When the families of the lost sailors pressed for answers, they were met with silence or vague explanations of enemy action. Pension files for the deceased listed death in action, but no battle record ever confirmed what action occurred. The British Ministry of Defense quietly buried the incident, and the Soviet government denied involvement entirely, stating that no such convoy was ever formally registered. In 1989, Norwegian fishermen trawling near the Bear Island region pulled up a rusted section of hull marked with a Royal Navy insignia. The damage appeared to come from high-impact shellfire, not torpedoes. One fisherman, Olaf Nygaard, went public with the discovery. Days later, his boat was found adrift, gutted by fire. Norwegian authorities ruled it accidental combustion. Independent investigators disagreed. To this day, the full crew manifest of Convoy QX-77 remains sealed under the UK's Official Secrets Act until at least 2073. Naval historians argue that the disappearance was likely due to severe weather or unconfirmed enemy action, but none can explain the silence surrounding the mission, nor the contradictory evidence suggesting friendly fire. The silence may be more revealing than the documents themselves. In recent years, pressure has mounted to declassify the remaining records, especially as surviving family members demand closure. Some believe Convoy QX-77 was a tragic mistake buried under layers of misinformation. Others think it was sacrificed in the name of experimental warfare, its men treated as collateral damage for a larger agenda. One survivor, then radio operator Thomas G. Riley, spoke briefly in a 1997 interview before his death. "We weren't supposed to come back. They told us it was a simple escort mission, but we all knew something was wrong when we lost contact with the sky. No stars. Just buzzing in your ears and a feeling that you were being watched by something you couldn't see." Whatever the truth, the icy waters of the Arctic continue to hold the secrets of that forgotten fleet, ghosts of a war that never made the history books, casualties of silence. In the final months of World War II, as Allied forces closed in on Berlin, a covert mission unfolded far from the battlefield headlines, a mission not aimed at defeating the enemy, but at capturing its most obscure and terrifying secrets. Known only to a handful of top military officials, Operation Eclipse was authorized by a joint Allied command to infiltrate southern Germany and extract Nazi scientists involved in a program so secret even Hitler reportedly feared it. Their field of study, the fusion of advanced physics and occult practices, what the SS called Die Schwarzwissenschaft, or the Black Science. While the world watched the Allies storm the Reichstag, a small unit of American OSS agents, accompanied by 2 British MI6 specialists and a handful of hand-picked engineers, slipped into the Bavarian Alps under cover of darkness. Their destination was Castle Wielsberg, an ancient fortress that had served as Heinrich Himmler's ideological headquarters. But this wasn't just an architectural relic. Deep beneath its foundations, Allied intelligence believed the Nazis were conducting research into anti-gravity propulsion, time displacement, and communication with non-human intelligences. The primary objective, seize the Black Bell, a device that reportedly resembled a large metallic bell, covered in arcane symbols and pulsing with electromagnetic energy. According to Allied informants within the collapsing Nazi regime, the bell, codenamed Die Glock, was developed by a team led by SS scientist Hans Kammler, who had vanished in the final days of the war. His experiments had already caused the deaths of dozens of prisoners and technicians, many of whom were said to suffer from extreme radiation burns and rapid cellular decay. Others went mad, speaking in tongues or drawing diagrams of unknown geometries. The mission was led by OSS Major Elliot Vance, a man with no public record and whose military file is still mostly redacted. Surviving logs from Vance's team, recently unearthed through a Freedom of Information Act request, describe an underground facility hidden beneath the castle, accessed by a descending shaft that was rigged with explosive traps. After neutralizing the defenses, the team discovered a lab unlike anything they'd ever seen. Massive copper coils embedded in the stone walls, blood-stained metal tables, and stacks of blueprints written in a blend of German, Latin, and Sumerian. The Black Bell sat in the center of the chamber, suspended by heavy chains. Vance's report described it as humming, like a living thing, its surface flickering with faint purple light. One of the engineers, Dr. Milton Ohms, tried to touch the device and immediately began convulsing. He died 14 minutes later, his veins blackened as though filled with oil. The team debated destroying it, but Vance insisted on extraction. The bell was airlifted out by a specially modified C-47 and flown to an undisclosed location in the United States, never to be seen again. Publicly, none of this was acknowledged. The official record stated that Wielsberg Castle was abandoned and of no strategic value. But in 1952, a Polish farmer near the German border reported seeing an American convoy transporting a large object covered in tarp, escorted by military police. Decades later, a former NSA technician claimed he intercepted classified transmissions referencing Bell storage and temporal residue quarantine zones. Perhaps most disturbing were the audio tapes found in the home of German mystic Otto Rahn, a known SS occultist who disappeared in 1939. The recordings, filtered through layers of static, seemed to contain chants and rhythmic pulses believed to be part of the bell's activation sequence. Linguists and physicists have attempted to decode the patterns. Some believe they are mathematical formulas describing nonlinear time. Others think they are warnings. In 1961, journalist Judith Ware attempted to publish a story titled, "The Nazi Time Machine They Don't Want You to Know About." The magazine it was meant for, Global Current, pulled the article before it went to print. Ware died in a suspicious house fire weeks later. All her notes were missing from the scene. The only modern glimpse of the bell came in 1997, when a leaked satellite photo showed a bell-shaped object in a fenced-off government facility in Nevada. The Pentagon denied the image's authenticity, but shortly afterward, the original uploader of the image, an amateur astronomer named Carl Bensley, disappeared while hiking near Groom Lake. His body was never found. A handful of declassified CIA documents from the Cold War era refer obliquely to E-271 containment protocols, including a statement that reads, "Object cannot be disassembled safely. High risk of phase shift. Personnel must maintain 3-meter distance during cycles." No context is given, but the timing matches reports of increased electromagnetic interference near classified installations. To this day, official channels maintain that Operation Eclipse never existed. But the Black Bell's fingerprints remain etched in scattered testimonies, ruined labs, and silenced voices. Historians agree that something powerful was removed from Nazi territory in those chaotic final days, something never mentioned in textbooks, yet too dangerous to ignore. Perhaps the most chilling comment came from a former U.S. Air Force officer interviewed under anonymity in the early 2000s. When asked about Die Glock, he replied, "We didn't win the war. We just collected what the losers were too afraid to use." In the narrative known to history, Hiroshima was the first city to suffer the wrath of the atomic bomb on August 6, 1945. But buried beneath redacted military records, overlooked civilian reports, and hushed survivor accounts is the story of a prior event, an atomic test not in the deserts of New Mexico or the labs of Los Alamos, but over a remote Japanese island weeks before the world ever heard the name Little Boy. That island was Hachihojima, located roughly 180 miles south of Tokyo. Sparsely populated and of limited military value, it was chosen precisely for those reasons. On the night of July 17, 1945, strange lights were seen in the sky by fishing crews miles offshore. The next morning, the sea was dead. Fish floated to the surface by the thousands, their scales burned and eyes clouded. Residents of the island reported a roaring sound, like a hurricane with no wind, and a bright flash that turned night into day. Within hours, the U.S. military classified the area as a no-fly zone. Aircraft carriers moved into formation nearby under the pretense of routine operations. But according to a collection of declassified memos from the Manhattan Project, a secret sub-operation, code-named Event Sunrise, was scheduled for that exact time. The documents mention live field calibration of Trinity-class yield device in maritime tropical environment, and orders to sanitize site post-activation. One American pilot, Captain George Talbot, wrote in a diary entry that would only surface after his death in 1979, "We flew perimeter recon around Jima 17. Sea glowed green-blue for miles. The boys on the deck said it was a sunrise in reverse. Couldn't sleep that night. Something was wrong with the clouds, they didn't move." He later noted that crew members were instructed never to discuss the mission, and their logs were rewritten before being submitted to Naval Command. What makes this event even more disturbing is the condition of the islanders in the days that followed. Japanese medical personnel dispatched from the mainland noted symptoms completely unfamiliar to them: hair loss, bleeding gums, burns that did not blister but instead left a waxy black coating. Though they had no frame of reference, we now recognize these as classic signs of acute radiation syndrome. Strangely, the Japanese government received no formal report from the Allies about the incident. Even after Japan's surrender, there was no inquiry made about Hachihojima. U.S. officials marked the island as irrelevant to post-war strategic operations. But a full year later, Japanese biologists returning to the area to study post-war marine life discovered a massive underwater crater just offshore, with highly unusual magnetic readings. Samples of the coral were sent to the University of Tokyo, where Professor Kenji Nakahara noted intense radioactivity, nearly 12 times the baseline expected in that region. Still, the truth remained buried. In the U.S., Event Sunrise was erased from military rosters, and the chain of command responsible for the test was dispersed into other programs. But discrepancies in radiation maps from that summer persisted. A 1947 internal report from the Atomic Energy Commission makes cryptic mention of a contingency trial exhibiting unacceptable trajectory deviation, and recommends strict narrative control in the wake of Operation Sunrise misfire. The implications are devastating. If this was indeed the first use of an atomic weapon in war conditions, why has it been erased? Some believe the bomb malfunctioned, its yield either too weak or too unstable to be considered a success. Others suggest it worked too well, but produced effects not yet understood. One theory proposes that the bomb used over Hachihojima was a prototype hybrid of uranium and early plutonium models, designed to test a multi-phase detonation that was ultimately abandoned. There are even rumors that the bomb was intended as a signal, not a strike. An intercepted Japanese transmission from the night of July 17 reads, "Light on the water. The sun falls, but rises again. Sky breathes fire." Some cryptographers believe this was interpreted by Allied intelligence as a missed psychological opportunity, prompting a need for a far more visible and undeniable demonstration. Thus, Hiroshima. But why the secrecy? Why bury an entire test from the public, the press, and even internal branches of the military? The answer may lie in a single line of a memorandum from General Leslie Groves to Secretary of War Henry Stimson. The Japanese will only surrender once. The message must be loud, clean, and complete. No half-light. No confusion. This implies that the Hachihojima incident created ambiguity, perhaps even questions about American technological reliability. If the test had failed or yielded uncertain results, it could have weakened negotiations, or worse, emboldened Japanese hardliners. By the time Hiroshima was selected, everything had to go according to plan, timed perfectly with political objectives, military optics, and global impact. But the silence came at a cost. Survivors on Hachihojima were never compensated, never acknowledged. Many died in the following years from unexplained illnesses. One of them, Yuki Matsuda, lived long enough to be interviewed in 1988. Her words were chilling. "We saw the second sun. And when it left, the island never healed. We buried our goats, our fish, our children." Modern satellite imaging of the island still shows an area of seafloor deformation that aligns with small-scale nuclear crater signatures. A team of independent researchers in 2003 attempted to take soil samples, but were denied access by Japanese authorities under pressure from the U.S. Embassy. The reason? Preservation of marine ecosystems. And yet, whispers persist in military circles and declassified archives. Hachihojima was Hiroshima's ghost, its forgotten twin. The test no one was allowed to see. The flash that came before history began. In the final chaos of war-torn Europe, as Nazi Germany crumbled under the advance of Allied forces, a shadow operation unfolded that neither the public nor many within the military would ever know about. It involved secret deals, unholy alliances, and a betrayal of every principle the Allies claimed to stand for. Hidden beneath the celebrated triumphs of D-Day and VE Day was the deliberate extraction of Nazi scientists from occupied Paris, not for arrest, but for recruitment, and not by the Soviets, but by the United States. The operation, later codenamed Velvet Eclipse, was conducted between July and August of 1944, just before Paris was liberated. Contrary to official narratives, Paris did not simply fall into Allied hands. It was a slow, strategic squeeze, during which the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, OSS, conducted precision raids on specific targets within the city. Among those targets were safe houses, private laboratories, and underground bunkers where Nazi physicists, biologists, and engineers were working on advanced weapons programs. These scientists were not the infamous names often associated with the V-2 rocket or the Nazi nuclear effort. These were deeper players, specialists in classified programs involving chemical warfare, gene experiments, and acoustic weaponry. According to surviving mission records, heavily redacted and released under FOIA in the late 1990s, the OSS infiltrated occupied Paris under the guise of resistance coordination. But their true targets were codenamed the Echelon 9, a group of scientists led by a man named Dr. Marcus Vall, a theoretical biochemist whose research focused on manipulating human hormonal systems to induce aggression, compliance, and hallucinations in enemy combatants. Reports indicate that Vall and his team were conducting field tests on prisoners from French internment camps. Civilians were being injected with modified compounds intended to simulate schizophrenia, or trigger extreme bursts of rage on command. Local French resistance leaders had attempted to storm the facility on multiple occasions, but were repeatedly thwarted, until OSS agents suddenly intervened, not to dismantle the operation, but to protect it. Agent transcripts recovered decades later reveal heated debates within the OSS. Some believed Vall should be executed or handed over to military tribunals. Others argued that his work was too valuable to fall into Russian hands. One memo from OSS officer Harold Griffin reads, "Vall is a monster, but he's our monster now. The Soviets won't blink taking men like him. We cannot afford to hesitate." Over the course of 72 hours, Vall and 8 members of his research team were extracted through an underground tunnel leading from the Paris catacombs to an airfield on the outskirts of the city. A French resistance cell that attempted to intervene was reportedly neutralized. No records of their deaths exist in the official Allied logs. Vall and the others were flown to a U.S. black site in Greenland, where they were held for several weeks before being transferred under false identities to a facility in Ohio. From there, they were incorporated into what would later be known as Project Carbon Halo, a direct precursor to MKUltra. But the cover-up didn't end with relocation. American intelligence fabricated Vall's death, staging an explosion at a fake Paris lab and circulating photographs of charred bodies allegedly belonging to the scientists. French media reported the incident, believing it to be an act of sabotage by the resistance. In reality, the victims were prisoners used to mask the operation. This deception was so successful that even post-war tribunals omitted Vall's name from war criminal lists. He was, officially, never captured and never found. Yet shadows of his work crept back into the light. In 1956, a CIA-funded university study on behavioral modification via hormonal stressors bore striking resemblance to Vall's pre-war research, including near-identical chemical compounds. Whistleblower Frank Olson, who died under mysterious circumstances in 1953 after allegedly threatening to expose illegal CIA programs, had written Vall's name in the margins of one of his notebooks, circled 3 times. Later investigations into Project MKUltra unearthed references to early European data and imported neurochemical frameworks, language consistent with Vall's original findings. One chilling phrase found in a 1954 memo reads, "Subject behaviors consistent with Phase 3 of Vall Protocol. Further tests pending approval." When journalist Alan Rankin tried to publish an exposé on Vall in 1972, he was discredited and forced into retirement. He later died of a sudden stroke at age 47. The article was pulled before it hit press. His notes, stored in a private safe, mysteriously disappeared before police could recover them. The French government, when questioned decades later, denied any knowledge of the exfiltration. But an internal document from the STIS, France's secret service at the time, refers to collaboration with Allied ghosts during the final days of the occupation. It includes a handwritten note, "They took the devils and left us the dead." To this day, there is no official record of Operation Velvet Eclipse. But traces of it remain scattered through black-budget financials, anonymous testimonials, and unclassified documents released decades too late. Some believe Dr. Marcus Vall lived under an alias until his death in the early 1980s, buried in a quiet Midwestern town. Others say he was transferred to South America in the late 50s, part of a second wave of relocated war criminals the U.S. couldn't afford to keep stateside. What remains undeniable is this: while the world celebrated the fall of the Reich and the liberation of Paris, a far quieter invasion occurred, one that brought Nazi science not to justice, but to safety. Behind the scenes, the victors didn't burn the enemy's research. They harvested it, protected it, and let its creators vanish into new lives, working in the shadows of freedom's name. In the northernmost edges of the world, where the Arctic wind howls over endless sheets of ice and the sun disappears for months at a time, there once existed a facility so secret that it wasn't listed on any U.S. map, any military document, or even within the classified corridors of the Pentagon. It was known only to a handful of individuals in the Office of Naval Research and the CIA as Station Zeta. Station Zeta began as a weather outpost in 1942, built on a remote portion of Ellesmere Island, just beyond the Canadian border. But after the war, when American interest shifted from storm fronts to psychological warfare, the station was repurposed into something far more disturbing. In 1947, under the pretense of cold environment research, the U.S. military began using the base to conduct human endurance tests, specifically, to study the effects of extreme isolation and experimental drugs on cognition, loyalty, and susceptibility to manipulation. The project, internally referred to as Operation Icepulse, had roots in both Nazi and Japanese medical experiments acquired after the war. The research drew heavily from data gathered during Japan's Unit 731 atrocities and Nazi cold exposure trials, information secured and kept secret through covert post-war deals. The logic was simple but chilling. If the Soviets gained an edge in psychological warfare, the U.S. needed to catch up, no matter the cost. Subjects were recruited from within the military, mostly young, expendable, and unsuspecting. Officially, they were told they were part of a high-security survival training program. In reality, they were drugged, deprived of sleep, and kept in complete isolation for weeks at a time in sub-zero conditions. Their communications were monitored, their food laced with LSD derivatives, and their quarters rigged with subtle psychological triggers, shifting shadows, distorted audio, false clocks that created time disorientation. Some subjects began reporting auditory hallucinations within days, low voices in the walls, whispers in non-existent languages. Others descended into paranoia, convinced they were being watched by creatures under the ice. A few simply vanished. The official reports listed them as escaped or frozen to death, but internal logs show zero effort to recover them. Their remains were never found. By 1949, the operation expanded. Detainees captured from overseas missions, labeled as unlawful enemy combatants long before the term entered public discourse, were flown into the base under complete blackout. These prisoners were subjected to prolonged exposure in what was called the glass chamber, a room engineered to maintain visibility but no communication. It had one chair, one speaker, and a constant tone played at 19 Hz, a frequency known to induce unease and fear. One subject clawed out his own eyes after 6 days. Another remained catatonic for the rest of his life. What made Station Zeta unique was its complete lack of oversight. There were no congressional briefings, no paper trails, and no exit procedures. The base was governed by its own rules, enforced by a team of Black Ops personnel who rotated every 6 weeks. Even the Canadian government, which had technically allowed U.S. construction on the island, was unaware of the station's true function. Then, in 1953, everything stopped. A freak storm reportedly severed all communication with Station Zeta for 4 days. When the retrieval team arrived, they found the facility abandoned. No signs of struggle. No bodies. No blood. Just a single word carved into the main control panel: awake. The team photographed the scene, collected hard drives, and sealed the station. It was marked decommissioned in internal records and left to decay. But a single reel of microfilm, discovered years later in the estate of a deceased CIA field operative, told a different story. The final logs from Station Zeta were a series of audio files. On them, a man, likely one of the staff psychologists, describes increasing instability among both staff and subjects. He mentions dream bleed, where multiple individuals share identical hallucinations. He references entity feedback loops, suggesting that the station itself had become a kind of living psychological trap, reacting to fear, amplifying it, reflecting it back. The final recording ends with the sound of footsteps, a door opening, and a faint, female voice saying, "It's your turn." Skeptics dismissed the story as Cold War paranoia. But satellite photos from 2001 showed unexpected heat signatures at the station's ruins, despite no known power source. In 2004, a Canadian film crew attempted to reach the site. Their last transmission described interference and missing time. They were never found. More recently, in 2015, a whistleblower claiming to be a former CIA technician leaked fragments of what appeared to be internal memos about a proposal to reactivate Zeta for hypothermic neurosync trials. One memo read, "Zeta's original results were not failures. They were a breakthrough. But we didn't like what answered." The Department of Defense refused to comment. To this day, Station Zeta remains a forbidden zone. Officially, it never existed. But buried in sealed documents, burned reels, and fractured memories are the ghosts of young men and women who believed they were training to survive the cold, only to find something far colder waiting inside. Every case adds a new layer of mystery, leaving more questions than answers. Which one lingers in your mind, and what's your take on what really happened?